I'm back with Ilya Shapiro, Director of Constitutional Studies at the Manhattan Institute, but we're talking about his experience at Georgetown, where he was Executive Director, Senior Lecturer of the Georgetown Center for the Constitution. Ilya, what you're describing is a rather scary situation, because what you're saying is that mainstream debates about the meaning of the law or the Constitution or about rights are essentially difficult to have anymore in Georgetown and by extension in elite precincts of academia, because now you've got this kind of hyper alert activist group on campus that goes and organizes a protest, and the administration is either so weak or so complicit that they take those guys as having authoritative governance, you may say, over what professors can say. Well, what does this portend for academia? I mean, you essentially decided, I'm not even going to get into this minefield because I know what's coming. And I think you're right to see it that way. But what does this mean for Georgetown, and what does it mean for academia?
Well, the Overton window, the acceptable range of policy views and expressions, has been narrowed and shifted far to the left. I've had students, there's not many faculty that are not progressive, but I've had students certainly tell me that they feel chilled, absolutely. And when their professors say all these sorts of things against conservatives or libertarians or Republicans. And by the way, in D.C., where Georgetown is located, political affiliation is actually a protected class under D.C. human rights law. So left-wing professors have said things that ostensibly violate the law, not just cause offense, but that's okay. And the problem is twofold, Dinesh. So first is the increase in bureaucratization, and especially these DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion offices, which is an Orwellian term because, of course, they subvert intellectual diversity, prevent equal opportunity, and exclude those who don't agree with progressive dissent from progressive orthodoxy. So the growth of those kind of diversity bureaucrats, at the same time, the university presidents and deans and so forth, it's not that they're radical and woke, but they placate these activist bureaucrats and other forces. That's the incentives that university administrators face. They kind of want to go along to get along, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But that's the main difference from, I graduated college nearly 25 years ago, law school nearly 20 years ago. The ratio of liberal, moderate, conservative professors or students, I don't think has changed very much. But what's changed is the administration kowtowing to these illiberal left-wing forces. And so it's that spinelessness that makes it intolerable for anyone who dissents from the orthodoxy.
Yeah, I think you're making a critical point here, which is that these universities were never, at least not in our lifetimes, run by conservatives. They were actually run by moderate liberals, and you had an activist wing that the liberals were somehow, at least in the past, this is going back to when I went to Dartmouth or you went to college, they were kept somewhat at bay. In fact, even academically, you'd typically be like, listen, if you want to be a feminist extremist, you can do it in the Women's Studies Center, but you're not going to do it in the history department, let alone in the biology department. But it almost seems like that those moderate liberals that ran the place have either lost their nerve or they've lost their power. There are fewer of them, and I'm guessing that the reason that there's so weak-kneed is that they fear for their own jobs.
That's exactly right. They fear being called racist and bigoted and all the rest of it. Ironically, I think by feeding the crocodile in the hopes that it eats them last, as it were, they're only making things worse. In the rare occasions of academic institutions where deans and administrators and presidents stand up to the mob and say at the very beginning, we're not in the business of policing, wrong think and wrong speech. You can counter that speech or whatever, but we are not going to be punishing or investigating people based on the views they express, like the University of Chicago, for example, where I went to law school. These things go away. The mob goes away. There's nothing that can be done. I mean, there can be protests, there can be discussions and debates, but there's not this kind of official action that just roils campuses again and again. So, Dean Traynor at Georgetown, I don't think he did himself on his own terms any favors in handling my situation as he did. I mean, at this point, he's pleased no one rather than trying to please everyone.
I mean, what's sad about it is that, I mean, it's an injustice to you. You then have to go elsewhere. It's, in a sense, as you say, harmful to the dean. And I think the worst people who suffer are the students, because if anything, there's a more of a chilling effect. If a professor can't speak their mind, you know that students are going to be at the receiving end.
Absolutely. And it's really unfortunate. Not just, outspoken conservatives or libertarians, but just the average law student who, just wants to get a good job and get a good education, but, wants to be able to discuss these sometimes fraught ideas without being socially shunned, let alone having official disciplinary action go after them. I'm not optimistic about academia, Dinesh. I am generally about society at large, and we're seeing pushbacks in our culture, even in big business sometimes with Netflix and otherwise. But in academia, I just don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. It seems like things are just past a critical point where it's just collapsing in on itself.
Ilya, we're going to have you back. I'd like you to think about, if academia is irretrievable, we need an alternative to it. Let's talk about that some other time. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I have a new Substack out as well, Shapiro's Gavel. So check that out in addition to my book, Supreme Disorder.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ilya. Appreciate it.